Just before I get going on today's episode of Tricks of the Trade, I have to make an apology because later on I've made a mistake. I've referred to a piece of music as being Badinery by Bach, and in fact it's Tambourin by Gothic. So you won't need to drop me an email. I already know I've got it wrong. There's only one thing to say to that. Sorry, Simon, what did you say?
Total rubbish.
Total rubbish. Enjoy the rest of the show. Hello and welcome to the start of my new series, Tricks of the Trade. Now, Tricks of the Trade, what are they? They are the secrets that professional demonstrators and players use to make their instruments sound really realistic and their performances very polished. So in this series, I'm going to share in little bite-sized chunks those secrets that I've picked up myself in my years as a pro player. And the first tip is, if you're going to play something on an instrument, choose a piece that instrument would normally play. So today we're going to be looking at the flute, and here's something that a flute certainly wouldn't play. That, of course, was Bach's famous toccata for organ. Here's another piece that you really wouldn't find a flautist playing. That, of course, was Beethoven's Fur-Elise, which is associated with piano. And here's another one that really doesn't suit a flute. The name says it all, doesn't it? That's the trumpet voluntary. But how about this one? The beautiful Annie's song by John Denver. And although that was a vocal, it was, of course, turned into a very famous instrumental by the flautist whose name just escapes me, like so many names these days, James Galway. James Galway. So that's a very suitable choice of piece. And here's another one, which is very much a flute piece. Lovely, isn't it? That was another piece by Bach, his Badinery, which is very much a flute piece. So that's our first tip. Choose a piece which is going to be suitable for the instrument you're using. Now, the second tip is that you've got to play it in the right range. We've got long keyboards and you could play a flute all the way up them, but it's not going to sound like a flute all the way up. Have a listen and see what I mean. Did you notice there was a part of the keyboard that sounded absolutely spot on as a flute, but the two low notes and the two high notes were just unconvincing, particularly the two low notes. So you've got to stick within that appropriate range. Right, tip number 3. There's something that a flautist has to do, and I'm going to play it without the flautist doing it at the moment. See if you can spot what it is. Did you spot it? It probably left you feeling pretty breathless because there was no gaps for breathing in my performance. It just went on one note joined to another. We have to leave gaps where the flautist would have left gaps in the piece of music, which is usually at the end of each phrase. Already sounds so much better, doesn't it? And here's another tip, and that is the higher the note that the flautist is playing, the more effort goes into getting that note. So although it's quite easy to play the bottom notes on the flute fairly smoothly, when they're really going for it on top notes, they tend to become more detached. And we can do that ourselves by playing in a detached or staccato way like this. Sometimes when aiming for a really high note on a wind instrument, you can just quite not make it, and before the note comes out correctly, it slightly cracks. Now we can copy that on our keyboard by tucking in the note just to the left of the note that we're aiming for. I'm going to just do that for you in very slow motion so you can see what I'm actually doing. Now here it is up to speed in Badinery. Every time I aim for a particularly high note, I'll just tuck a little one in underneath. Those tuck notes are very common in jazz type playing. And if you've only got a classical sounding flute on your instrument and you want to make it sound a little bit jazzier, one little recipe I use is to introduce an organ type flute, like a drawbar organ, and I introduce it with one of the fraction sign sounds. So if I was playing on an ordinary flute, I would mix it with a 5 1/3 drawbar, which gives you this much more jazzy sort of sound. Now, sometimes we can leave a button pressed or a control turned up, which is inappropriate to what we're using. And I'm going to just demonstrate how this can happen with a flute. Listen to this and see what's on that shouldn't be. Did you notice that the notes were ringing on? That just wouldn't happen on a flute. The moment the flautist stops blowing, the note stops. But I've got left on my instrument the sustain control. So that's an absolute no-no for any wind instrument. Make sure the sustain is switched off. More and more modern instruments are set up so that the moment you select a sound, it's doing what it should do. And one thing that a flautist can do is introduce wobble to a note, or vibrato to give it the technical term. But the thing about vibrato, if you're putting it on for yourself, is that it will never be heard on a flute that's playing quickly or short notes. Vibrato starts after the note's been sounding for a while. So how can we make sure that the same thing happens on our instruments? Here is vibrato just switched on so that it works all the time, and you'll find it sounds quite bizarre. The control we needed to add to vibrato to make it realistic on this occasion was delayed vibrato, because it will then only come in when the note's been held for a while, and it makes such a difference. Have a listen to it now I've got that switched on. Here's another tip. A flute can only play one note at a time, so unless you've got a group playing together, you should only be able to play one note at a time. A particularly unrealistic sound is achieved if you're playing along single notes at a time and then suddenly play a right-hand chord. So either play chords all the way through, as though you've got a group of flutes, or play single notes all the way through. You don't want to mix the two together. There are probably other things I will think of as soon as I've stopped recording this that flutes can do. One thing they do very decently is trill. But that's all my ideas for now. So I hope you've enjoyed this first part of Tricks of the Trade. We're going to be picking up instruments one at a time and exploring what they can and can't do. And I'm looking forward very much to being with you again for the next instalment. For now, I shall say bye-bye.